Shalom uvracha. It's wonderful to see you, my friends. Leah, I haven't seen you for a long time. It's nice to see you, even via the screen. It's nice to see our friends in Prague. Shalom uvracha. Yofi.
And Rev Sperling, we have a special guest. Shiran's mother is on also, a fellow Aussie.
Where is that? Who is that?
Right there.
Hello, Rev Sperling, Diane.
It's good to have you with us. Shalom uvracha.
Good to be here too. Thank you.
Much nachas from your children and your grandchildren. Wonderful. Okay, let us begin then. We only have an hour, so we'll start learning now. We're talking about the theme of the seminar is the relationship between Israel and the nations, and we're going to look at a particular approach to that from Rav Kook. Rav Kook, as we know, the first chief rabbi of the land of Palestine, at the end of the 1800s, lives until the beginning of in the 1930s, and a master of Jewish thought, of the depths of Torah. And on this issue, he has a lot to say. We certainly can't encompass it all in an hour, but I just want to give an opening to one of the basic ideas that Rav Kook writes about this issue. And that's, we're going to get to it by asking a very, very basic question that we see in the Jewish world today even. We, in many, many communities, we see that there's a movement of that believes that Judaism should be very connected to the world at large. We have expressions probably taken out of context from their Kabbalistic first intentions, but ideas of tikkun olam in large sections of Judaism. And when they use those words today, they're used in a sense of meaning a need to fight for world justice, for improvement of the world. Even when it's not what we're giving to the world, what we're taking for the world, we see large segments of the religious community, of the Jewish community, not just the religious community, are very involved in worldly pursuits that come from outside the 4 cubits of our synagogue, of our Torah, of our Beit Midrash. I don't know if we can count up how many Nobel Prizes we've won. I don't think any of them were for Talmud. Is there a Nobel Prize for Talmudic studies? No, I don't think we won that. I don't think there is one, right? There's not a Nobel Prize for Torah commentaries. I don't know. I would love a Nobel Prize for Hilchot Shabbat. I think that'd be great. But you're right. You could give that to Rav Moshe Feinstein, right? Nobel Prize for Halachic Novele. But there's just no such thing. But we've won all these Nobel Prizes in science, in the arts, in literature, in economics, in theory. So we're, in many sense, there's a large segment of Judaism that's very, very open to an obligation to help the world, to be involved in the world, and to take from the world. And in our community, I don't know how we can, I don't know, I'm not familiar with everyone altogether here, but I think that would be, we feel comfortable with that. We feel good about that. We proud of that, and we think that's a very Jewish thing. On the other hand, there's a large movement in Judaism which is very disconnected from the world. Throughout Jewish history, but even today, there are large segments of find it more in the Orthodox community, who don't really care about what happens to the world, or at the most see the world as a distraction or as a challenge, both in our responsibility to the world, but much more in our connection to the world, in what we're supposed to be giving to them and our reaction from them, or what we're supposed to be taking from the world. And maybe at best, ideas of influencing or responsibility to the nation is some messianic ideal that after the Messiah comes, of course, and all the nations do tshuva, and they all want to come to Jerusalem, like the prophet says, and come up to the third temple, then we'll have something to talk about. But at the moment, we'll use words like, I don't know how much Yiddish you all know. Do you know the word Narishkeit? Yes, Narishkeit is all that secular stuff, all the world, we'll start using words like goyim in the sense of they're just not us, they're not what we're connected to. So where does the truth lie? Are we really supposed to be outward looking, or are we supposed to be inward looking? So we're going to approach this question by seeing what Rav Kook has to say about it, and we're going to look at one of his I can even say the word sermons. Rav Kook usually doesn't write sermons, and most of Rav Kook's writing is like esoteric spiritual diary entries that are very hard to understand. But when he was a young man in his early 20s, in his first rabbinic post, he actually wrote a book of real sermons as in things that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The quotes start with a pasuk and then go on to a few midrashim of Chazal, and then come up with a novel idea and wrap it all together. And he got the book ready for print, and it mysteriously disappeared. Someone stole it, and it was never printed. And only about 15 years ago, it kind of turned up. 20 years ago, it turned up again somehow in Jerusalem, and mysteriously someone found it, and they printed it. And so that book exists. It's called Midbar Shur. A small selections of it have been actually translated into English. And it's interesting because you see Rav Kook, not just as he normally see him with his spiritual conclusions, but we see the process of his thought. So this is one of his drushim, one of his sermons that he made for about Purim, about Amalek. And I'm sharing the screen with you. It's been sent out. The source has also been sent out to you. And Rav Kook starts with a verse in the book of Shemot. And the verse says, Vayoma Hashem o Moshe, Ktov zot zikaron b'seifa, v'yasim ba'oznei Yoshua. God says to Moses, write this as a memory in the book and put it in the ears of Yoshua. Ki mache emche et zecha Amalek mitachat hashamayim. For you will surely, the double, you will wipe out. We say in English, you will surely wipe out the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. On this verse, Rav Kook asks several questions, but one of the main questions he asks is, why this double language? Why does Moses have to write this law to wipe out the seed of Amalek in a book, and then also put it in the ear of Yoshua? Not only is there a duality here of writing in a book and putting it in the ear, it's a mixed metaphor that doesn't work very well. If you write it in a book and you try and put that in someone's ear, surely Yoshua was going to get an earache, right? Because to put a book in someone's ear isn't going to work. He could have said, make it into a poem and recite it to the ears of Yoshua. Or he could have said, write it in a book and put it before the eyes of Yoshua. But writing something in a book doesn't get put in the ears. So that's the main question that he's asking us. Several other questions, but that's enough for us today. Then he goes on in the way of all good sermons to ask another question. And the second question he brings is from a midrash. And in source 2, this the midrash, it's in Pasha Bashalach, and it asks, the midrash says like this: on the words that you should put it in a book, there's 2 opinions brought in the midrash. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, כשבא עמלק להזיק את ישראל מתחת כנפי אביהם בשמיים. Rabbi Yeshua says, when Amalek came to destroy Israel from underneath the wings of our Father in heaven, when Amalek came to destroy Israel, Amar Moshe lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moses went and he spoke in front of the Holy One, blessed be He. And this is what he said: Ribono shel olam, Master of the universe, Rasha ba la'abed bincha mitachat kanfecha. This evil one is coming to destroy your children from underneath your wings. Sefer Torah shenatat lahem, mi krabo. The Sefer Torah that you gave to the children of Israel, who read it? In other words, Moshe says to Hashem, save us from Amalek, because otherwise the Torah that you gave to Am Yisrael, no one in the world will read it. Good claim. Rabbi Elazar Amodei brings a slightly different version. What does he say? Omer, K'shaba Amalek la'azik et Yisrael mitachat kanfei aviyam b'shamayim. He starts off the same. When Amalek came to destroy Israel from underneath the wings of their Father in heaven, Amar Moshe lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moses said in front of the Holy One, blessed be He, Ribono shel olam, Master of the universe, bincha she'ata atid lefazer tachat ruchot hashamayim, your children, which in the future you're going to scatter to the 4 corners of the heavens, shene'emar ki arba ruchot hashamayim v'gomer, as it says in the prophet Zechariah chapter 2, that you're going to scatter us to the 4 corners of the heavens. Rasha ze ba lekalan, this evil one, Amalek, is coming to destroy them. Mitachat kanfecha, from underneath your wings. Sefer Torah shenatat lahem mi krabo. the Sefer Torah that you've given them, who will read it? Rav Kook asks on this source, what's the subtle difference between the two different opinions? The first opinion, Rabbi Yeshua, just mentioned reading the Sefer Torah, but the second opinion, Rabbi Elazar, mentioned that the Jewish people are going to be scattered in the diaspora to the four corners of the world. And if Amalek destroys them, who'll read the Sefer Torah? So that's the second questions that Rav Kook is asking on this midrash. In order to answer the questions, and in order to give us an understanding of exactly what we're looking at today, Rav Kook quotes a pasuk, and this is what's going to guide us through our whole shiur today. Rav Kook starts with a pasuk. It's a pasuk in the book of Shemot, chapter 19, verse 6, and it's probably familiar to most of you. In the book of Exodus, chapter 19, it says, "Va'atem tiyu li mamleket kohanim v'goy kadosh." God says about the Jewish people, and you will be to me a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. You'll be for me a kingdom of priests and how are we going to translate this? A holy nation. Let's stop a little bit and write down those two ideas, because they're what's going to be the key to understanding Rav Kook's understanding of our relationship with the nations. Before we can understand our relationship to the nations, we have to understand what we are. And Rav Kook says that this verse is the opening to understanding what we are. We have a dual task. Says Rav Kook, we have a dual task. What's the dual task the Jewish people have? Our first task, in the order of the verse, is a mamlechet kohanim. Mamlechet is a kingdom. Kohanim is Cohens, priests. We are a nation of priests. If we're a nation of priests, who's the congregation? Who's coming to our church? We're a nation of priests. All of us are priests. We're all Kohanim. I mean, even those who are not Kohen. I'm not a Kohen. But the verse says that we're a nation of Kohanim, a nation of priests. So who's going to be our congregation? Answer, the world. The first task of Israel is defined by our relationship to the world. We are the priests of a universal congregation of humanity. We see that idea, for example, we say in Sefer Devarim, "Atah hareit ladat," that our job is to show the world that God is one. This idea is not so foreign to us if we've learned a bit of Chumash. First Jew, Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu declared the concepts of godliness to the world. Now, part of that declaration at a certain time in his life was to convert people. We know that Abraham converted the men and Sarah converted the women, and Nefesh Asher Asu B'Charan, the souls that they converted in Haran. But at a certain point in his life, probably after Brit Milah, he wasn't so much into converting people anymore. But he certainly had a strong relationship with the world. He met the greatest kings, Paro in Egypt, Mamre, Eshkol. He sat with the giants of the kings of Sdom and Amorah. And his job was to be the spiritual guide for humanity. That's the first charge of Am Yisrael, a Mamlechet Kohanim. Then we have the second half of the verse, which is Goy Kadosh. A Goy we're going to translate as a nation, and the word Kadosh we're going to translate as separate, unique, holy. The word Kadosh is often used in the sense of holiness, and it's also used in the sense of separateness. There's a relationship between separateness and holiness. But a Goy Kadosh here means a nation that is a nation that is uniquely spiritual by itself. And that's the second task of Am Yisrael, to form a particular relationship with Hashem that's particularly holy. If we only had the first task, if I can just ask Gilly's phone to turn off your microphone, thank you. If we only had the task of our relationship to the nations, we might be able to achieve that better if we weren't so separate. Right? You might achieve that better as being actually more integrated into the nations, perhaps. Nonetheless, to achieve the task of self-holiness, of a special holiness, that we can only do if we're apart. So let's go and see how these two ideas come out through Rav Kook's teaching and how it answers our questions at the beginning of the class that we had about the verses of Amalek. Rav Kook is going to relate these ideas to two parts of the Torah. We know that there's a written Torah and an oral Torah, Torah shebichtav and Torah sheba'al peh. In source 4, there's a verse in Hosea that says, Echtov lo rubai toratai kamo zan nechshavu. It's a very tricky verse. It's hard to translate, but the rabbis in the Gemara make a great drasha on it. And they say that the verse means, God says, had I written down the rubei, the abundance of the Torah, not just the written Torah, but if I'd written down the oral Torah too, then the Jewish people would have been considered as foreigners. What does he mean? If God had written down not just the written Torah, which he did write down and give us, but if he'd also written down the oral Torah, and it hadn't been oral, the Torah sheba'al peh had been written, then the Jewish people would have been considered as foreigners. What does that mean? Rav Kook wants to say that the written Torah is largely for our first task of being a mamlechet kohanim, a nation of priests. And our second Torah, the oral Torah, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Torah sheba'al peh, is connected to our inner, personal, spiritual connection of the Jewish people, unique with Hashem. This is an incredible idea. Rav Kook admits that ultimately the written Torah was given to the Jewish people, and it's especially for us, and on a certain level, it's just ours. But there's no denying that the Bible's been a bestseller. It's had a huge influence on humanity. We've done really well. There used to be a world where they sent me to America to get students. Now we don't. We've got rid of airplanes and all that stuff. But at one time I was there in America, and they put me in a hotel room. You open up the drawer, there's a Bible there. Okay, it's not a perfect Bible, and you don't want to read all of it, and this and that. But hey, that's a bestseller. We've had a lot of influence on the world. I heard of these movements that are based on the Jewish Bible. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Christianity, Islam. Wow, that covers most of humanity. The Bible, the written Torah, has affected the world on our first task of being a mamlechet kohanim. And we've done really, really well. The ideas that every human being is created in the image of God, and that a person needs to respect humanity, the ideas of a day of rest, Shabbat, the ideas of not stealing, the ideas of respecting one's parents, the ideas, they're all they're from us, from our Bible. You know, there's a very interesting verse that says that God commanded Moshe Rabbeinu when he entered the land of Israel to take, Moshe then commands Yeshua to do it, but to take 12 stones from the Jordan River and to set them up at the entrance of Eretz Israel, to whitewash them and to write on it the whole Torah. And the verse says to write on it the Torah, be'er hetev, very clearly. And if you look there at Rashi, he quotes, what does it mean, be'er hetev? And he understands it means to write the whole Torah in 70 languages, in all the tongues of mankind. Technically, we can argue how you're going to write the whole Torah in Japanese and Chinese and French. And there's not a lot of room on 12 stones, but so, whether it means just write the whole 10 Commandments, whether it means really 70 languages, but that's what the rabbis explain, that when you come into Eretz Yisrael, you have to set up the Torah on 12 big stones in 70 languages. I once asked my Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Shlomo Aviner, what was the idea of this? And he answered an amazing idea. He said, well, you know, on your front door, you have a mezuzah. It's got a few lines from Shema in it. He said, Eretz Yisrael needs a very big mezuzah. It needs the whole Torah. I said, that's beautiful, Rabbi. I said, but why in 70 languages? He said, well, all the Jewish people are staying in Israel. We're not going in and out of that door. Who's coming in and out of Israel? All the nations. They're the ones who are going to come in and kiss that mezuzah. So you need to write the mezuzah in Greek and in English and in Swahili and in all the languages of the world. So all the nations who are coming to come and make a connection with the Jewish people and then going back to South Africa and Venezuela and wherever it is can take that Torah with them. So that's why we write it in 70 languages there. It's a beautiful idea. It fits in beautifully with what Rav Kook is saying here. The written Torah is to fulfill our task as a Mamlechet Kohanim. And the oral Torah is for the Jewish people. The oral Torah is our inner spiritual connection with Hashem. It's a Jewish work. My father-in-law, he should be well and healthy for many years to come, used to teach Talmud at university. And he said he's also got a law degree. He taught it in the law department of the university in Australia. I said, how is it teaching Talmud to non-Jews? He said, well, every year there are a few Jews who take that course because it's a good course for Jews to take, but I get Jews and non-Jews. He said, I can always tell who they are. The Jews, they've been doing, even if they're totally non-religious, they've been doing Torah Shabbat Peh around the Friday night table forever, arguing with their cousins, arguing back and forth with their parents and grandparents. They're really good at it. They take nothing for granted. They love arguing. He said, I get all these religious Christians and they say, but God said there's no question. It's just what it says. You can't ask a question on that. He says, nah, there's no hope for those guys. They never understand that you can take a verse and just argue with it. I found it very interesting. I'm sure it's a great generalization, but the Torah Shabbat Peh is uniquely Jewish. It's for our intrinsic relation with Hashem, says Rav Kook. And therefore, that saying that we learned from the verse in Hosea, had God written down the oral Torah, then it would have been written Torah. And if it was written Torah, then it would have been for the non-Jews. And then there'd be no difference between the Jewish people and the non-Jews. And that's what the verse says, that had I written down all the Torah, the rabbis explain, Echtov lo rubai Torah, if I'd written down even the oral Torah, then the Jewish people would have been like all the other nations. But because we have an inner special relationship with Hashem, we have an oral Torah too. So I want you to remember that the written Torah, according to Rav Kook, has a large part of it that is to fulfill our task as a Mamlechet Kohanim, as worldly priests, and our oral Torah relates to the idea of the Jewish people and our inner special holy relationship with Hashem that only the Jewish people, the unique relationship. We see that difference between the two things, just for example, just in how many mitzvot there are to do. The non-Jews have 7 mitzvot, and Jewish people have 613. There's a special, unique, holy relationship that we have with Hashem. But there is a relationship with all the world too, and that's the Mamlechet Kohanim. This relates to how we understand anti-Semitism in the world, which we hope to get rid of pretty quickly. But it seems that we can't really win, can we? Because the non-Jews, if we try and be like them, we get in trouble and there's anti-Semitism that we're trying to mix in too much. And when we try and be separate, we get anti-Semitism because we don't mix in enough. We really don't seem to be able to win with that one. Rav Kook has a very unique taste on that. He said, well, let's go back to the first source of anti-Semitism. We find a good source in Esav, when the rabbis say that it's a halacha that Esav hates Yaakov. And obviously this is not meant to describe the relationship with every single non-Jew to every single Jew, because Baruch Hashem, there are many, many, many fine non-Jews who have great relationships with Jews, and many of us have wonderful relationships with non-Jews. But the Midrash is trying to talk about the underpinning hatred that exists in the world between many of the nations in Israel. And if we look at Esav, we see that he complains about 2 things. One is that Yaakov stole the birthright, the Bechorah. That's what he did with the bowl of soup. And the other is that he sold the bracha, the blessing. And that's what he did by putting on the furry coat, the hairy coat, and tricking his father was. Now, we understand that both those things really belong to him, that he really was spiritually the firstborn, and the blessing really belonged to him. But from an external point of view, from Esau's point of view, both those things were stolen from him. Rav Kook explains that those two things relate to those two tasks the Jewish people have. The birthright is your intrinsic self, who you are. Your birthright is the intrinsic special relationship that the Jewish people have with Hashem, because we're born in a certain way. And that exists no matter what you do. Whether you live a religious life or you don't live a religious life, whether you're learned or unlearned, whatever generation you live in, you're born with a Jewish soul, and that's your birthright. And because of that, you have an intrinsic special relationship as a Goy Kadosh, as a Jew, and your relationship with Hashem. And because of that, you're obligated in the mitzvot, and you're obligated with a special relationship with Hashem. But the bracha, the blessing, is what you do with that. The bracha, if you read the bracha, it's what you're going to go and do in the world. That there's a lot of free will about whether you're going to do it or not do it. The blessing is what you go and do in the world. That's our mamlechet kohanim. That's the task that we go and influence the world with. So the true anti-Semite hates us for one or both of those reasons. He hates us either because we're trying to influence the world and make it a better place. And here we could quote such great anti-Semitisms of Hitler, יימח שמו, and others who say the Jewish people are trying to give a morality to the world that is it's uncomfortable for them, and they don't like the way that we're trying to affect the world morally. And we can only kind of agree that we do have hopes to influence the world and make the world a better place. Yep. That I didn't read the book myself, but isn't there that bestseller, The Elders of the Protocols of Zion, something like that we're trying to overtake the world with moral goodness? Maybe they got left out of the book. But yeah, that's our idea. We actually do believe that we want the world to stop, to be a better place. And we're trying to influence the world like that. And that's Esau's claim against, or the anti-Semites' claim against our bracha, against our mamlechet kohanim. They don't like that we see ourselves and try and influence the world to make it a better place. But the other thing they can get upset about is dafka the opposite, is our separateness. And we know that many anti-Semites through history are very upset at our bechorah, at our firstbornness, and our claims of unique relationship with Hashem, of being chosen people, even though we understand that chosen is just an obligation to us. It doesn't mean that we're less than any other, but more or less than any other people. We're unique with a lot of obligations, and that's also what the nations get upset about. So if we go and we look at a really interesting argument, we know that Amalek in the Torah attacked Israel at a place called Rephidim. It's in the book of Shmot in chapter 17. We get attacked at a place called Rephidim, and there's this great argument in the Gemara, Masechet Bechorot, that brings two different opinions, an opinion of Rabbi Elazar and an opinion of those who argued with him, about what that word symbolizes. We're probably more familiar with the second opinion, Acharim Omrim, that Rephidim al Shem Sherafu Yedehem Min Torah. Rephidim comes from the word rafui, which means to be lax, to be soft, lackadaisical, that their hands were lax from fulfilling the Torah. Why did Amalek attack us? Rephidim, because we weren't doing our job, because we were lax, because we didn't keep Torah enough. But what does Rabbi Elazar say? He says Rephidim, Amalek, Rephidim kamashma'o. Rephidim is just the name of a place. Rephidim means Rephidim. It doesn't mean anything. Wow, you could put me in the midrash. I can explain lots of verses if that's the way we're going to do it, right? What's the deep meaning of that? Well, just place name, that's all. But they don't quote me. What's he saying? So Rav Kook explains like this. The opinion that says Rephidim means that they attacked us because we were weak in our thing, in our hands, because we didn't do what we're supposed to do. He's talking about anti-Semitism of Amalek, who is attacking the Jewish people because we're supposed to be influencing the world, because we're a Mamlechet Kohanim, because we're supposed to be doing something. And they don't like what we're doing, and we weren't doing it well enough. So God sends them to attack us. Our hands were lack from what we're supposed to be doing in the world, and what we're supposed to be doing is being a Mamlechet Kohanim. But Rabbi Eliezer says, no, there's anti-Semitism in the world just because of who we are. Refidim means refidim. Don't look for deeper reasons, just intrinsic hatred. It's in hatred of the essential quality of the Jewish people being a Goy Kadosh, which is our birthright, which is who we are. It's not based on anything we do. It's based on a self-definition of holiness of who we are. And that's what he means. Don't go looking for reasons. The mere fact that you're a Jew, the mere fact that you have a unique connection with Hashem is enough for anti-Semitism. We're going to go back to the beginning of of this sermon and now explain the two questions we asked at the beginning. We now understand what it means, what the argument in source 2 between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Elazar about what Moshe Rabbeinu asked Hashem when Amalek came to attack us. He says, the second opinion says, God, you're planning to send us out to the four corners of the world. If Amalek wipes us out, who'll read that Sefer Torah? What does it mean to send us out to the four corners of the world? That we can see in a midrash that Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch quoted a lot in source 6, that says that the Jewish people were only exiled. Lo galah HaKadosh Baruch Hu et Yisrael lebein umot. God only exiled the Jewish people amongst the nations, ela kadeshi tasafu aleim gerim, in order that we should have more converts. And he brings a verse to prove it. In other words, there's a task of the Jewish people. We're supposed to go into the diaspora. We're supposed to influence the world. You're going to spread us out. We're going to have influence in the world. We're going to be a Mamlechet Kohanim. And Amalek is coming to destroy that. Hashem, don't let that happen. But the first opinion, Rabbi Yeshua, he says, no, Hashem, Amalek's coming to wipe out just the Jewish people because they have a Sefer Torah. That is a unique connection with you. These two opinions reflect the two tasks of the Jewish people. And now we can go back to our first verse and understand why there's a double language here. Vayomer Hashem Moshe in source 1. And God says to Moses, Ktov zot zikron b'sefer. Right? This is a memory in the book. Vasim ba'oznei Yeshua. And put it in the ears of Yeshua. There are two sides to Jewish people's uniqueness, two sides that Amalek, that anti-Semitism wants to wipe out. The first side is what we're supposed to be doing to the nations, and that represents the written Torah. So write that in a book. But then there's the side of the oral Torah, put in the ears of Yeshua, the oral Torah, the intrinsic Goy Kadosh side of Am Yisrael. Ki macheh imcheh, because he wants to wipe out. There are two wipes out he wants to do. And then we can understand what Haman said to Achashverosh. Yeshno am echad mefuzar mefurad bein ha'amim. Haman said about the Jewish people to Achashverosh that there's one nation that is spread out amongst the nations. But according to Rav Kook's reading, we can understand it very cleverly. We can say there's an am echad, there's a unique nation. Haman is complaining about the fact that we are a united, unique, singular nation of being a Goy Kadosh. But we're also mefuzar mufurad bein ha'amim. But we're also out there, spread out and influence the nations because we're a Mamlechet Kohanim. And that's why in the book of Shemot, it says, when do we go to war against Amalek? Ki yad al kesya milchama la'Hashem ba'Amalek dor l'dor. When do we have a war for Hashem against Amalek in every generation? When they put their hand on the kes, when they put their hand on the throne of God. The name of God represents our intrinsic Goy Kadosh, our connection with the intrinsic holiness of God. The throne is God's relationship with the world, and that's our Mamlechet Kohanim. this sermon highlights for us Rav Kook's ideas about our relationship with the nation, with the nations. We asked at the beginning, what are we here for? Are we supposed to be out there with on the streets demonstrating for civil rights? Or are we supposed to be inside the Beit Knesset davening and learning another page of Gemara? So the answer is yes, that's right. Yes, to both those questions. The answer is we're Mamlechet Kohanim, but we're also a Goy Kadosh. We have a relationship with the nations, and we have an inner holiness that we need to build. What does Rav Kook do with this idea in all his thought? Well, I'll start by telling you that in the book of Orot, one of Rav Kook's greatest works, in the first section of Orot, Rav Kook explains that this dual task of the Jewish people explains the process of the diaspora. He explains that in the times of the temple, in the first temple and the second temple, less in the second temple, but certainly in the first temple and partly in the second temple, the Jewish people were focused on being a Mamlechet Kohanim. We had very little to do with the world. There were some connections. King Solomon did have a connection, but very little. Our task was to build the holiness of the Jewish nation. We went into the diaspora for various reasons, but one of the underlying spiritual reasons, explains Rav Kook, was in order that we could understand and be related to humanity as a whole, that our universalism would grow. He says, then we're called back to the land in this last of end of days messianic process in order to elevate our task as Mamlechet Kohanim through a greater Goy Kadosh. But to be able to look at the diaspora, thousands of the diaspora, as a means for not just fulfilling the ideas of Mamlechet Kohanim, but also to gain a deeper understanding of the reason for that. Imagine if we stayed in Israel with closed borders for the last 2,000 years. How much would we really care about civil rights of the immigrants in America? Right, I know in the last, I don't want to get into anything political or whatever, but I know that there's talk about civil rights of people in America. I don't live in America. I don't want to get involved in anything, but I know that a lot of Jews are involved in helping people. If we'd stayed in Israel for 2,000 years, closed off just by ourselves with our own temple, I'm doubtful how much we would have seen our task as a Mamlechet Kohanim. I doubt whether we'd be able to understand them. I doubt whether we'd have the language with which to talk to them. And on a much deeper level, I don't know if we'd really appreciate the work that needs to be done. But we who suffered not a few pogroms, we who've suffered not a little bit of social discrimination, tend to understand what it is to be an immigrant. We have a first-hand knowledge of what it means to be the other with a capital O. And that has given us the empathy and the understanding of what needs to be perfected. So that's one place where we see that Rav Kook's understanding of this duality of the task of the Jewish people leads Rav Kook to look at the Jewish people differently, to look at Jewish history differently, to understand the task of the nation differently. I want to take you to another place where this idea is so beautifully thought out. It's not very threatening for us to look at Galut like that, is it? It's not. It actually, maybe just before we leave the diaspora, we can then understand it, a very interesting phenomena of the diaspora. Many of us in the diaspora, not just in modern times, but you can go back to the Abarbanel, you can go back to the relationship the Jewish people had with great with the leading rulers and empires, and also with the non-Jews, we worked very hard at the aspect of being a mamlechet kohanim, of our task of relationship to the nations while we're in the diaspora. But there's always been a good group of us who have rejected the stay in the diaspora, who've built their own little synagogue, who've closed themselves off in the Beit Midrash, who've dwelled in the 4 cubits of the pages of the Talmud, and have had as little as they can to do with the nations while they've been there. Sometimes that was forced upon us, but sometimes it was quite actively sought out. I know that in many religious communities in the world today, they're actively they're the first ones to build the walls up around us. So we can understand that phenomenon now based on what Rav Kook says. Because while we're in the diaspora and we're working so much on being a mamlechet kohanim, we've been spread out to the 4 corners of the world, as the Midrash said, we need to have a good group of Am Yisrael who's working on being a mamlechet kohanim. But we need to have a greater group, or a strong group, or a core who's also working on being a goy kadosh. If you don't have those people who are just inside, just dwelling on the uniqueness of the Jewish people, we'll lose that entirely. So that explains why there are some Jews in the diaspora who don't want to go to university, who don't want to have anything to, who change their dress, who build the walls, who lock the doors to the ghetto, because they're connected spiritually to the side of being a goy kadosh, while the rest of Am Yisrael is so busy trying to be a mamlechet kohanim. And that's a national balance. I want to take us in the time remaining to a very famous but interesting speech Rav Kook gave. When he was the chief rabbi of Palestine, they opened up the first Israeli university, being the first university in the land of Israel ever, the Hebrew University. And at the opening to that university, Rav Kook was invited to speak, and he gave a very famous and infamous even talk. And in that speech, which I sent out to you in Hebrew and in English, Rav Kook talks about how does he relate to the opening of a university. Now this is very interesting, because you would think that as chief rabbi of Israel, he wouldn't have much to say about the opening of a university, except maybe don't go to it and go to yeshiva instead, right? That's something we hear from many rabbis today. But Rav Kook doesn't say that at all. And he explains the idea in a very deep way. And let's read together here in English on the page that I've opened up for you here. The paragraph that begins, there are 2 spiritual tendencies in Israel. The one, an inner and holy sacred one, tending to deepen his soul and to spread the light of Torah from within. That's what we called in our first learning being a goy kadosh. This aspiration is served by the Torah, the stronghold of Israel's soul, and by the Talmudic schools established in our midst from the earliest times for the glory of Torah. We see here that even now he said not just the Torah, but which aspect of the Torah? The Talmudic side, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, right? That's the Beit Midrash, that's Nishmat, that's your Torah classes. This spiritual aspiration is clearly defined and resolute, neither fearing nor yielding to any obstacle. It's pretty good. If you're inside the Beit Midrash, you don't have much to fear. Nonetheless, you got a little bit to fear, yet in spite of his faith, Rav Nachunya ben Hakana, on entering the Beit Midrash, prayed, may no hindrance arrive in my path. So even inside the Beit Midrash, even inside the world of being a Goy Kadosh, you still have to pray that, please God, you should be successful and you won't follow. But this is the first side of Am Yisrael, our inner side. Next paragraph. The second spiritual tendency of the nation serves not only to deepen the inner sacredness of the Torah, but also serves as the medium for the absorption and the propagation of ideas, the propagation of Jewish concepts and values from the Jewish world into the wide world of the nation. Let's let's take this. There are two things he's saying. That the second spiritual tendency is not only to do what the first one does to deepen the inner sacredness of Torah, but serves to do these things. One is to get Jewish ideas out there, and the other is to absorb them. Now, until now, when we've been talking about being a Mamlechet Kohanim, we've been talking about Abraham Avinu going proclaiming Judaism to the whole world. We've been talking about us getting Bibles in every hotel room in the world, about us establishing these, influencing Christianity and Islam and making the world a better place. Rav Kook, in talking now about that second level, really opens it up to a much deeper idea. He says it's not just about us putting ideas out there. Take note, look very carefully at what he says. He says this second tendency serves the medium for not just the propagation of ideas, the propagation of Jewish concepts and faiths from the Jewish world into the wide world of the nation, but he mentioned here also as a medium for absorption. What does he mean, a medium for the absorption of ideas? Let's look. For this purpose, we've been set as a light for the peoples, or the Goyim. And for the absorption, here is again, the absorption of profane learning from without, from all of humanity. To adapt to our own life the good and sublime which we receive, and to transmit it again to the world at large. Being a Mamlechet Kohanim is not just about teaching the world the 7 mitzvot of Noach. It's infusing society with a level of godliness that elevates all of humanity. Now, how are you going to do that? I studied Talmud for many years. I didn't find a tractate that deals exclusively with economic policy, with how to be a good social worker. Certainly there are ideas about economy and ideas about social work in the Talmud, but don't know. Unemployment benefits. Are we in favor? Are we against? I don't know who invented unemployment benefits. I don't know. There's probably some Jew somewhere. I don't know. But what is Rav Kook telling us here? He's telling us we need to take from the world at large, that is, to be connected to the nations, to be concerned with their concerns, to be dealing with their dealings. And then we have to take those concepts, elevate them. There are some we have to reject, but then we have to elevate them and then give them back to the world on a higher elevator, holier level. That's a huge idea. Says Rav Kook, and for the attainment of this end, the university can serve as a great and worthy instrument. That's one of the ideas of a university. The flowing of information, of ideas, economics, literature, science, the arts, medicine. Judaism doesn't claim to be the best doctors in the world, even though there are a lot of good Jewish doctors. That's not our claim to the world. That's certainly not our Goy Kadosh. But according to Rav Kook, we do have an idea of taking the world's medicine, elevating it with the sense of Jewish morality, a sense of Jewish ideals, and be able to give that back to the world. And that's what the university is for. Rav Kook goes on to say that here we have a lot to fear. He recognizes that this is not an easy task, that most of the people who go and try and deal in this area get washed away in the torrent of secularism. He says that in order for us to be successful in the task to be a Mamlechet Kohanim, we have to have a very clear understanding within ourselves of the relationship between Mamlechet Kohanim and Goy Kadosh. Let's go on and read a little bit more about what he says about that. He says, here, my beloved brethren, there is reason to fear. From the earliest times, we've already had experience with the dissemination into the world of our most cherished ideas and concepts. There was the translation of the Torah into Greek, in relation to which there were two responses from the Jews. The Palestinian Jews feared, the Greek Jewry rejoiced at the work. Its heart was enlarged. We also permitted the entry of foreign culture. With the development of foreign culture, of Greek philosophy and cultures of various nations with whom we came into contact throughout our long history, these cultures gradually penetrated into our philosophy. This also, while looked upon with apprehension by some, was welcomed by others, right? Everyone's smiling now and they're thinking of the Rambam, right? He did a really great job. The Rambam took secular knowledge and brought it in. We can think in our modern times, Rav Soloveitchik, great, right? Studied in university, took secular concepts and managed to bring them into the Jewish world. But, says Rav Kook, not everyone was so successful. When we regard these events from our present point of view, we see that neither the fear nor the rejoicing were unjustified. We gained because of these tendencies, but also lost not a little through them. It is quite clear that those circles which welcome these two tendencies without apprehension and with careless optimism and rejoicing, but few of their descendants have remained to participate in our difficult and sacred task of building the country and reviving the nation. The great majority of them became assimilated amongst the nations. They've been caught up in the current of the abundance of the seas and the force of the Gentiles which have come into them. Only those who have been truly creative, who have sat securely within the walls of our spiritual fortress, in the tabernacle of our Torah, in the holiness of the commands and laws. Rav Kook wants to say that we've talked this morning about two tasks of the Jewish people. We have a Mamlechet Kohanim, we have a Goy Kadosh. We then went on to see that the Mamlechet Kohanim is not just giving out, it's taking in, elevating and returning. It's participating in, it's being part of there. It's not just standing up there with a microphone and saying what we want. It's being involved in the nations to a very large degree. In order to do that successfully, says Rav Kook, we have a lot to fear. Because most of the Jews who've done that, all those Nobel Prizes we talked about, they don't actually stay Jewish. They actually get so involved in the task of being a Mamlechet Kohanim that they forget that they're supposed to be the Kohanim and they just become part of the world at large. How are we going to be successful in that? Says Rav Kook, it all depends on how firmly you're connected to a really true concept of being a Goy Kadosh. Not that I think Rav Kook would say that it has to be on a one-to-one level, that you have to have X number of hours in the synagogue in the Beit Midrash and X number of hours in your office in the university. He's talking about the nation of a large and a connection of Jews to our own uniqueness. When the nation of a large puts importance in our holy sanctity task, in an understanding of the importance of learning Torah and the importance of being uniquely Jewish and the importance of our Adat Hashem, and the nation can feel that they're connected to that, and that's part of their basis, then as an individual, you are more able to become part of the Mamlechet Kohanim than the part of the Goy Kadosh. Go for it. But you'll be successful with that because you know that there is a Goy Kadosh, because you feel it's part of your societal makeup and part of your inner building of personality. These themes that we've seen this morning in Rav Kook's writing go all the way through. We've discussed them just in 2 or 3 places in the concepts of anti-Semitism, in the concepts of the purpose of the diaspora over the many years of the Jewish Galut, and the concepts of our relationship to secular knowledge. But he writes about in many, many, many different aspects, in many different cases. But the basis is always the same, the duality of the task and our relationship with the nations. I want to thank you for your attention and your participation this morning. We should be blessed all with good health, and please God, we continue to get vaccinated. We should all be able to meet in person in the Beit Midrash in Nishmat speedily soon. I look forward to seeing you then. Shalom uvracha.
Thank you very much. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Lee, I just wanted to say hi. Happy to see you. It's been a long time. Eliana